Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out to me. 2 ways to do this is, of course, through email and then again through YouTube. Now, this is greatly important and appreciated, and I encourage it because it helps with the development of the channel. And also, word of mouth greatly helps. So feel free, you know someone that would be interested in my show, feel free to share it with them. Tell them about the Harboring Light. All right, so on to the topic of joy. So what I'm going to do is, this is going to be a pretty lengthy series. So first, I'm going to talk about my aspects of American Gods, the television series, when it was on Showtime. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to give my thoughts about the book. Now, I'm starting it, and I'm going to break it down into certain chapters. So on Wednesday, I'll talk about the first 2 chapters. With that said, let's jump right into it. All right, so initially when I saw American Gods on Showtime, it was really interesting because that was around the time when, I had found out later that American Gods was actually, the television series was actually based on the book, American Gods. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's really interesting. And so, and then, there was other shows that were based on book, like Outlander and so forth. And I always find it quite interesting when there are shows out there that take the time to adapt to, the adaptation of it in a television series or a movie. And so, Showtime, at its best, what it does, which it really gets into the aspects of going into the harsh reality of humanity. And American Gods is really one of those books that really delves deep into the aspects of the seediness, so to speak, of the human condition. And so when I saw it, I was like, oh, well, this is one that's really different, because there has been different takes, about the aspects of God and how gods, not God, but gods, and how they would be implemented into society, right? And it's quite interesting in the show. You can see how that was with this particular television series. This was the, forerunner of putting social, political politics in there. And the reason why I say that is because it delved into going into really outlandish, well, let's say taboos that is not easily to just turn your eye and ignore, which was very appropriate for a show like this to be on Showtime, because if they tried to, I don't even know if it would have worked out all that well, maybe, if it was on FX, because FX is sort of different now, but at that time, when we get into the 2010s, it was still they were still only wanting to push barriers at certain limits, and so was AMC. When it comes to original content on their network. And so what do I mean by this? So initially, when you watch the series or see the series, there's this guy who's a cabbie or something like that. And it turns out that he is an actual god or something like this. But the aspects of it, he is Middle Eastern, or he's I'm trying to he's Middle Eastern, but I'm trying to think about like it. I don't know for sure like what part of the Middle East he's from, but anyway, is adamant that he's Middle Eastern. And so, especially when you get into the aspect of Islam, it's from you with death. Okay, there is no crossing the line with homosexuality. And so that is showcased with this man who is Middle Eastern. And so it's like, starting out with that, well, what are we getting into? And then it delved in, as the series went along, it started to push more and more and more about the aspects. And I'll get that into the next part of that, what I'm talking about here on Monday, of the aspects of these gods or goddesses transforming themselves and influencing their power into decades, certain decades, which is, giving that proverbial, I guess you can say, Pandora's box, leaking out, sins into the world, or so to speak. So with that said, I'm going to give some more thoughts about that. All right, let's get right into it. All right, so initially, what I was talking about, with the Pandora's box and everything, with this particular goddess here, the fact that they implemented her to me, she just so happened to be African American, but also with the aspects that she just so happened to have this, how they wrote her in, with the lesbianism and all these kind of things. I think to justify the aspects of the beginning of, well, it really wasn't the beginning when you would think about Showtimes, because it was all the shows that were showcasing the aspects of gay lifestyle. But I think what they were doing with the aspects but it's quite interesting because towards the end of the series, you could tell that, they were just pushing, saying, okay, we're on Showtime, so we're going to delve into the aspects of being X-rated, just to be X-rated, which is, it always gets frustrating when series, that are on cable television or premium access cable television, well, we don't have cable television anymore. By the time, when you get with satellite and stuff and things which you have to pay to see, now, it's streaming and they have their own apps and all these kind of things. But, it's kind of like, come on, guys. Don't just, rest on your laurels. Continue it out. Especially when you have really good source material that you're pulling from, with the aspects of the adaptation of American Gods, with the book. All right, so getting back to the point here. So, I don't think it was a coincidence that they had her. They were showing, when I was saying about decades, they particularly showcased her in the 1970s. And then, from what I remember, and it was this whole thing where they showed the aftermath of this high endowed, indulgent lifestyle of the 1970s. With the aspects of transitioning from 70s to the 80s with the AIDS crisis and the AIDS epidemic. And that was very interesting because when you think about it, what do people typically associate with the 1970s? They associate disco. It was just high end, really good times, free for all, good vibes all around. Just good vibes. Let's not say that. Just whatever feels good, and that's it. That's pretty much what you get. Just a high life, what you get for the most part when the 1970s are come across, the mind when with adults think about it or whatever, or that, or if it's implemented in a kid-friendly way, it's just fun, and on the flip side of that, which is really interesting, and it was probably just, you can see from a business point of view and a network point of view, shows do that where they bring in notable people in order to get a lot of viewership. So it was interesting. And then, the aspects with the Pandora's box, that I think that's what essentially what she was getting back to, this particular God and goddess being in the 1970s and transitioning to the 80s, giving the reality of the situation of what would that actually be to those effects to actually happen in a real world, in a global sense, what would that mean outside of a Greek mythology, with the impact of what it had, or with that particular goddess Pandora. And so with Kristen Chenoweth, as a goddess in the show, is really interesting because she is really good with making it all appropriate, cute, and friendly, with being inappropriate, which is wow. Because she made that work for her. The way she looks very approachable because she has blonde hair, she's petite, and everything else. She just looks like she just fits that mold. And then she made that work for the aspects of taking certain roles where you get you perverse that image of what you think of her, of what you perceive her to be when you just look at her. And so when the three characters, the central characters, there are central characters in the book, and I'm going to get into more specifics on that on Wednesday, when they come into her world. And then it's interesting because she has everything laid out and showcased to where everything is innocent, and nothing here is threatening or alarming. And then when they tear down that fabric and everything is actually implemented for what it is, you start to see the reality of the situation. And so there's that. Now, I'm going to say this. So, And I bring this up here because this is something that is, I think, really impactful for the ending point that I have with the series here, and then translating that into the book on Wednesday. Now, I know in my heart, I relate, and I know that the Christian faith and the Christian values, that's me. And there's a lot to be said about the aspects of merging your Christian faith and walking your life in a secular world, right? Now, I understand and I appreciate, people that say, well, you should, that's something that needs to be just, hard line separated. And I would say, with the aspect of that, you know what, I think that if you, just be forthcoming with people, hey, these are my boundaries, this is how I feel, this is how I believe, and, look, hey, understand how you feel, peace be with you, but I don't meld that way, but, here you go. And I think that it'll make you even more reinforced and more confident and more defined in your spirituality and your relationship with God, with the Christian faith, because it would help you see, what the teachings of Jesus and everything else, what that actually means when these are, put upon people that don't see it that way, and you're just gentle and reassuring about it. Not everybody's gonna be, understanding, of course, but I don't know. It's just something about, there's a lot of divinity with that when people, find that balance in between the secular life and spiritual life and everything. And so, why am I talking about this? I think, when you get into the heart of the matter, this is merely from my point of view. I think that the author was trying to break the ice and say, hey, because when I was growing up, that these were the rules, when you get into the job market here. There's certain things that you do not talk about, when you are at the job place. You don't talk about religion. You don't talk about spirituality. You don't talk about politics. Religion, spirituality, the same thing, really. You don't talk about these subjects because they are, for the most part, very polarizing, and people get in their ways and dispositions about it, and it's hard to, move forward. Now, when you talk about mythology, or you talk about fables, those things are, for the most part, very relatable to a lot of people because they welcome that. They're like, oh, yeah, okay, I heard y'all, oh, I didn't think about it. Oh, okay. And the conversation starts to get in the depth, whether some people are more interested versus others. But for the most part, people are more willing to talk about subject matters of that nature. A really good example of that, of how fables and myth, fables, let's focus on fables and myths. Well, they're pretty much the same thing. Let's focus on fables. And then Norse mythology with gods. Hey, and pagan rituals. Winter solstice. Now, winter solstice, a lot of that has implemented itself in the commercial aspects of what we know today as Christmas, all right, with the Christmas tree and the lights and all of these things. Those beginnings were with Norse mythology and winter solstice, all right? And there's other accounts of that. And then people have a lot of different interested in the aspects of gods and goddesses, and with when you think about Cupid, when you think about Aphrodite, Nike, Victory, right? There's athletic line. They chose Nike because that's the symbol of being victorious or winning, beating the battles, all this. They have a lot of implement, and they were staying in culture because these stories relate to the primitive, well, I would say the natural instinct of people wanting to pass down stories and talk about them. And having it to where, what would it be like, for these essential figures, where it be gods, goddesses, right? Or, I guess you can say maybe a little bit of characters from fables. What would it be like? How would they implement themselves and implement their influences in the world? What would be the impact of that? And then when you go into the series, you see them showcasing their influence and what that actually relays, and how that it's repercussions for that in these situations in the series, and how these three essential figures in itself are, if you look at them, they are for the most part gatekeepers in reining all these things in. And I have a lot of appreciation when however they lie or however they feel, when it comes to subject matters like this, because it's really these subjects are very touchy and very taboo, and it can be very hard to get honest conversations about that, because most people just don't want to go there, and it's understandable for the most part. But at the same time, it's also reflective, and it helps when you are willing to talk about things like this, to change your point of view about certain things that have meaning to you and why. And I don't know, I just find that quite interesting that this author came along and was wanting to get that out there and make a book of this caliber. Alright, so those are my thoughts about the series. And then, towards the end, it was unfortunate because, when they implemented the aspects of Orlando Jones coming in and just, doing this thing where, there's one indulgent fast after the other. That's really unfortunate, because and in itself, it's taken away from the point and the adaptation of what you could really do with that. And getting back to that with the aspects of adaptations, they say, oh, well, we don't have enough time, or at least with Blade Runner, they, when you find out the information, at least the writers were saying, well, they didn't really understand it, or it wasn't really, from what I understand, they didn't understand, or it wasn't all that interesting to them or something like this. And so they just wrote it in a way in which was relatable to them and made it work for them. And you could see if they took the time, or they had somebody on staff or someone, that was interested in the book. Do androids dream of electric sheep? It would have changed the discourse of Blade Runner to give it more depth, but I digress with it. So those are my mere thoughts here. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to me. Alright, so the best way to do this is, as I said in the beginning of the series, either through email or YouTube. And I greatly appreciate those who reach out to me. And who, especially on YouTube, thank you so much. Alright, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care out there. Bye-bye for now.